Bueno, bienvenidos al tercero video del repaso del verano. Welcome to the third video in this summertime review series that we're doing for Miss Lobello's Spanish class at St. George's Episcopal School. This go around, we're going to be talking about numbers and how we describe the numbers of things using a special verb. So let's go ahead and start with numbers. I hope it's safe to assume that most of you already know your numbers 1 through 10, but if you don't, they are like this. And I'll just put them right here, so pay close attention to how they're spelled. And we'll talk about the spelling in just a second. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now notice a couple of things. For one thing, especially 6 and 7, 6 and 7, they sound a lot alike only insofar as you have an S sound and an E and I sound. Now the thing is, a lot of people like to switch the E and the I around so that they spell it out siete instead of siete. Siete is wrong and siete is right. And then they spell the word sies instead of seis, S-I-E-S instead of S-E-I-S. It's one of those things that early on you really need to watch out for because, again, like I said before, pronunciation errors and spelling errors, they can lead to a lot of miscommunications and a lot of kind of errors in speaking the language itself. Okay, so moving on. Past the number 10, of course, you get into some other familiar territory that we can talk about. So let's just go from 11 to 20. Okay, so 11 to 20 are once, doce, trece, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Now again, make sure that we're looking at the word 20, especially the 20, 17, and all the other numbers like from 16 down to 20, that you make sure you have the IE instead of an EI, because 17, make sure you really pay close attention to where you put that letter I there in between 17. Especially down here with 20 as well, make sure it's V-E-I-N-T-E instead of V-I-E. There's a word that sounds a lot like 20, but all they do is they just switch the E and the I, and it becomes this word viento. And viento is actually the word for windy. If you look outside and it's windy, you would say hace viento. So don't put the word 20 with the EI, because you might get someone confused as far as what in the world you're talking about. These numbers, especially with, it's really apparent as to what they might mean. If you look at them just kind of briefly, you see like the word 10 is the word for 10, and the word 6 is the word for 6. So you put them together, you get this word 10 y 7. 10 y 7, it's like saying 10 and 6. Much of the same way we in English say 16. And if you were to look at other languages do something very similar to this, but we won't really get into those right now. Anyways, moving on, the numbers 21 through 30, we'll just take a close look at those only because they are spelled a different way than the numbers once we get past that. So let's take a look at this. We'll say 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. Again, kind of paying attention to how these things are spelled, these are all one word. You're not going to find them separated into 3 different words. You're not going to see them separated into 3 words until we get to the next little set here. So let's take a look at the number 30. Now, the number 30, 30, once you go past 30, you're actually going to see it divided up into three words. You're going to hear the words 30 y uno, or 30 y dos, all the way up to 39. We have the word 30, 30, we have the word and we have the word uno, dos, o tres, whichever comes next, right? So whenever you want to have a number between 31 and 39, just you say the word for the tens, say the word for the ones, and say the word for the word for and in between them. So let's actually just take a look. Well, let's start with 30, and we'll take a look at the numbers in our tens spot here. So here we go. Follow along as we go through 30 to 100. 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. Now these numbers 30 through 90, they work the same way that 30 did. So if we wanted to say something like 42, we would say 40 y dos. 40 and 2. If we wanted to say something like 65, we would say 60 y cinco. 65, 60 and 5. If we wanted to say something like 99, we would say 90 y nueve. And everything is just the same, just like that. So really, you only need to know about 20 different vocab words in order to express any number between 1 and 99. You have like your 1 through 10, right? So those are important. You've got the numbers for 11, 12, and 13, and 14, and 15, which are a little bit different. But then after that, it's just 10 and 6. Then you have 20, 30, 40, 50, all the way up to 100. And if you can get those, say, 30, 35 root words down, the rest is just putting them together. One last thing we'll talk about before we move on to how we express these things in sentences is the numbers 100 through 199. Once you get past 100, now we're going to go past 199, but once you get past 100, the word cien changes to ciento. The word ciento is just to indicate that there's something that follows afterwards. The thing to note is that we're not going to actually use the word e in this case. We're only going to use the word e if there's a 10 and a 1 later, but we'll get into that in just a second. So for instance, 100 is cien, 105 would be ciento cinco, ciento cinco. 120 would be ciento veinte. 135 would be ciento treinta y cinco. Notice how we only use the e in between treinta y cinco, right? In between the 10s and the 1s, that's the only time the e shows up. So let's try it a couple of times here. I'm going to say a couple numbers, and you tell me what number you think it is, and then we'll do the reverse in just a second. So, how do you think we say this in English? 84. 84. If you thought 84, you're right. 84. 51. 51. Okay, if you thought 51, you're right. 51. How about 197? 197. Right, 197. 197. 197. All right, well, think about this. How would you say the number 29 in Spanish? 29. 29. 29. How about the number 58? How would you say 58? 58. 58. All right, how would you say 164? 164. 164. Well, good. Okay, so before we get into the next section, which will be how we describe numbers in sentences, let me give you a couple new vocab words. All right? The first, and probably one we'll be using the most in this section, is the word I. I means there is or there are. It's a special verb form that the root verb of which you probably won't know until very much later down the line in your Spanish studying. The next word is cuantos or cuantas, which is a question word that means how many, like what quantity. The next word is chicos, which is boys, chicas, which is girls, and estudiantes, which is students, and finally profesores, which is teachers. Now we'll talk about how we form words into their plural form and into their singular form later in the different video, and we'll also talk about how verbs and nouns in Spanish always reflect gender, but for now, these words, we'll just be using those. So, when we want to figure out how many of something is, we need to be able to ask the question. So, the question like this, I'll ask this question. ¿Cuántos chicos hay? ¿Cuántos chicos hay? That question means, how many boys are there? ¿Cuántos chicos hay? Now, if I wanted to say how many girls are there, I might say, ¿Cuántas chicas hay? ¿Cuántas chicas hay? Notice how the word chicas ends with as, so cuantos will become cuantas with as at the end. ¿Cuántas chicas hay? How many girls are there? Now, let's take a look at a picture here. We'll have a picture just like, up on the screen here. We look at that, we say like, ¿Cuántas chicas hay? Well, we look at the picture, how many girls are there? Say there are 7 girls. We'll say, hay 7 chicas. Hay 7 chicas. There are 7 girls. If there are 7 boys, we'll just say, hay 7 chicos. You guys know that actually it's easiest to open the banana from the bottom. You open the... Alright, so let's take a look at some more pictures. Look at this picture right here. And answer me this, in a complete sentence if you can. ¿Cuántos profesores hay? ¿Cuántos profesores hay? Now, if you said this sentence, hay un profesores, you did a couple things wrong, which isn't your fault because you didn't know it. First off, the word profesores is the word teachers. If we wanted to make the word teacher by itself, we would drop off the es and we would make profesor. Or if it was a lady, we would change the or to ora, we would make profesora. In a similar vein, the word uno by itself, meaning one, is useful in certain circumstances, but when we're talking about how many there are in a room, we would actually change the word uno to either un for something that's masculine or una for someone that's feminine. For instance, if the teacher was a man, we would say this, we would say hay un profesor. If the teacher was a woman, we would say hay una profesora. Right, so take a look at your sheet after this video has been finished and see if you can't figure out what these questions are asking. They should have the English kind of in parentheses there, and see if you can't write out the answers, and when you get done, you can scan your little QR code down at the bottom and see if you can't get the answers for yourself. All right, well, again, it's really useful to know the numbers. It's really useful to have the spelling of the numbers down before you really get into anything else, and it's really useful to know how to describe how many there are in a certain situation if you know how to use the word hay and you know how to use the word cuantos. Cuantos meaning how many, hay meaning there is or there are. Now remember guys, when we write questions in Spanish, and again we'll get into this in more detail later, you always put an upside down question mark at the front and a normal question mark at the end. Now, some people like to write their question mark with this sort of backwards. It's pointing it the wrong way, but it's not a big deal at first if you do that, but eventually you will want to learn how to write your punctuation correctly. So, thanks a lot for listening. I hope this was a big help for those of you who are still trying to catch up. So, stay tuned for the next episode, and